At 3 a.m., the screaming match next door made it impossible to sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, fighting the urge to go over there and strangle the whole family. Finally, I gave up and popped half a sleeping pill. By 7 a.m., I was dragging myself to work with a splitting headache. As I stumbled down the hallway, I overheard the neighbors gossiping and hushed frantic tones. "Did you hear midnight last night? Everyone in apartment 5B was slaughtered." I froze in my tracks. I live in 5A. When my alarm had gone off earlier, something felt off. The air in the apartment felt heavy. Wrong, but I didn't have time to dwell on it. I had to get to the office. Stepping out my front door, the metallic tang of blood hit me instantly. Police tape crisscrossed the door of 5B. A crowd of uniformed officers blocked the hallway. I accidentally locked eyes with an older detective. His gaze was sharp, cutting through me like a scalpel. I just stared back, blank-faced. My eyes barely open from exhaustion. The sleeping pill hangover was real. I felt like I was floating in a fog. Honestly, I didn't care if the people in 5B were dead. Good riddance. I fantasized about killing them every single day. Every night at midnight, like clockwork. They started their noise. I work in high-pressure e-commerce, and I suffer from severe insomnia and neurotica. They were torturing me. I'd written polite notes. They ignored them. I called the cops twice, but the second the police left, the husband from 5B would pound on my door screaming obscenities. "It was you, wasn't it? You bitch? Open up. I've got a cure for your insomnia right here." He'd hammer on my door with a baseball bat, terrifying me into silence. I wanted to move, but my landlord held my security deposit hostage. I had to finish the year lease. So if 5B is dead, I don't care how it happened. I'm just glad I might finally get some sleep. Down in the lobby, the gossip was spreading like wildfire. "Did you hear 5B? Whole family dead." "Really?" I heard it was around 1 a.m. A chill ran down my spine. Wait, if they died at midnight or 1 a.m., why did I hear them fighting? At 3 a.m., an elderly woman, Mrs. Higgins, chimed in. "I was up early for the market. I saw the bodies when they wheeled them out. Lord have mercy. It was gruesome. The husband had his eyes stabbed out, face covered in blood. The wife had a knife in her chest." I gasped, the fog in my brain clearing instantly. I have a weak stomach. I can't handle blood or horror. Hearing the details made me nauseous. I covered my ears, rushed out of the building and squeezed onto a crowded subway car, trying to drown out the world. That evening, I got home late, exhausted. I opened my laptop to put in some unpaid overtime when a knock echoed through my apartment. "Police, open up." My heart skipped a beat. I'm a law-abiding citizen. I've never had the cops at my door, but considering I shared a wall with a murder scene, it made sense. "Open the door." A young officer and the older detective from this morning stood there, sizing me up. Can I help you?" I stammered. The older detective, Detective Miller, smiled tightly. "Just routine questions, ma'am. Don't be nervous. You want to come in?" "It's a bit messy," I offered. "Here's fine. You are Emily Vance. What do you do for a living? How long have you lived here? Do you live alone?" "Yes. I work in e-commerce operations. Been here 6 months. I live alone." "Where were you last night at midnight?" I grabbed my laptop and showed them the timestamp, 12 a.m. I just finished work, shut the computer, and went to bed. The young officer scribbled in his notepad. "So, after midnight, you were alone with no alibi?" I frowned. "Technically, yes. But are you suspecting me just because I live next door?" Miller shrugged. "Standard procedure. We have to ask everyone." "How was your relationship with 5B? "Terrible. I admitted they were loud. I called the cops on them. Before you can check the records." Miller nodded, a smirk playing on his lips. "We will. We verify everything." I took a deep breath. I had nothing to hide. "Officer, when exactly did they die?" The neighbor said midnight, but I swear I heard them fighting at 3 a.m. That's why I took a sleeping pill. Both officers stiffened. Miller's eyes narrowed. "Are you sure? Could you hear what they were saying?" I shook my head no. Just the usual screaming, cursing each other out. Young officer wrote furiously. "Did you hear anything else in the hallway? Doors opening, heavy objects falling." "I heard the guy from 5B go downstairs once, probably to throw out trash. I don't know the time." Miller nodded slowly. "All right, the killer hasn't been caught yet. Keep your doors locked. Don't leave town." They turned to leave. I started to close the door, but Miller spun around, his hand catching the frame. "The killer could still be in the area. You live alone right next to the crime scene. Aren't you scared? Why stay here?" What kind of question was that? My phone started blowing up with Slack notifications. My boss. Of course. "I'm scared," I snapped. Anxiety rising. "I'd love to stay at the Ritz. But who's paying for it besides with you guys swarming the place? This is probably the safest building in the city right now. I have to work. Can you close the door for me? I rushed back to my laptop. I worked until midnight, fueled by panic and caffeine. When I finally lay down, the silence was deafening. Usually the noise from 5B kept me up. Now the silence was worse. I kept imagining the bodies on the other side of the wall. I couldn't turn off the lights. I was too scared to take a pill in case I needed to run. Then I heard it, footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate. They stopped right outside my door. Tap, tap. I stopped breathing. Tap, tap. And the footsteps walked away. I lay frozen in a pool of cold sweat until the sun came up. The next morning, I dragged myself out the door, praying for a meteor to hit the office, so I wouldn't have to go in. Instead, I ran into Detective Miller. He was leaning against the wall, holding a greasy paper bag of bagels and coffee. He looked like he hadn't slept either. Breakfast, he held out a bagel. I bought extra. I'm late for work, I said. He blocked my path. Call in sick or I can call them for you. My heart hammered against my ribs. Why are you seriously suspecting me? Look at me. I'm 100 pounds, soaking wet. The guy in 5B was a tank. How could I kill 2 people? And why? Because they were loud. Miller looked around the hallway, then lowered his voice. You really want to discuss this out here? Let's go inside. I had no choice. He came in, tossed the bagels on my table, and I started eating. I was starving. While I chewed, I texted my boss that I was sick. Miller wandered around. My apartment. You don't wear makeup. I'm a corporate slave. I don't have the energy. I get it. He watched me wolf down the food and chuckled. Bad news, Emily. All the evidence points to you. Want to save us some time and confess? I choked on my coffee. Are you joking? I'm not confessing to something I didn't do. I take the blame for stuff at work all day. But I'm not taking the fall for a double homicide. Miller sat across from me. Do you have any hobbies? TikTok, YouTube. I watch videos to fall asleep or on the commute. Do you watch pimple popping videos? Ingrown hairs, hoof trimming? I grimaced. God, no. I saw one once and almost threw up. Disgusting. Miller leaned in. The murder weapon was something like a stainless steel condom extractor, a pimple popper. I checked your Amazon history. You bought a professional grade kit last month. I don't see it in your bathroom. Where is it? Oh. That I thought back. I heard they were good for blackheads. It didn't work. So I tossed it somewhere. I lose everything. Wait. You can kill someone with a pimple tool. Depends on how you use it. You can't stab a knee with it. But he pointed to his eye, then his throat. Stop. I gagged. I don't want to know. You're eating a bagel pretty happily. For someone with a weak stomach, fear isn't the same as disgust. I countered. Look, someone is framing me. It's the perfect setup. Miller sighed, wiping crumbs from his mouth. I hope you're right. The weirdest thing is, nobody in the building heard a sound after midnight except you. You heard 5B go downstairs. He stood up. Get some sleep, Emily. I wish there were no bad people, so you could sleep, too. I muttered, actually feeling bad for him. He gave me a long, unreadable look. Yeah, me too. He still suspected me. I slept until noon, worked from home until midnight, and was just about to crash when the knock came again. Police, you need to come with us. The knock didn't stop. It wasn't the polite, hesitant tap from the night before. This was a heavy, authoritative pounding that rattled the cheap hinges of my front door. Police. Ms. Vance, open the door. I stared at my laptop screen. A spreadsheet detailing Q3 logistics blurred in front of my exhausted eyes. My heart was a frantic bird trapped in my ribcage. I stood up, my knees popping in the suffocating quiet of the apartment, and dragged myself to the door. I undid the deadbolt. Detective Miller stood there, looking older and grayer than he had that morning. Beside him was the young, eager-looking officer from before, his hand resting casually near his duty belt. Put your shoes on, Emily, Miller said. His voice was flat, devoid of the weary camaraderie he'd faked over bagels. You need to come with us. Am I under arrest? The words tasted metallic on my tongue. We need you to answer some questions at the precinct, the younger officer barked, taking a half step into my doorway. Get your coat. Am I under arrest? I repeated, my voice sharpening. I work in corporate logistics. I deal with aggressive vendors trying to bulldoze me every day. You don't give an inch. Miller sighed, running a hand over his face. Not formally. But if you make me get a warrant to drag you out of here, I will. We found something, Emily. You really want to do this in the hallway? I glanced past him. Down the hall, Mrs. Higgins' door was cracked open an inch. A sliver of light spilled onto the carpet. Someone was watching. Fine, I muttered. I grabbed my oversized winter coat and my phone. As we walked past 5B, The smell of copper and industrial bleach made my stomach roll. The crime scene cleanup crew had been there. The ride in the back of the unmarked cruiser was silent. The city flashed by in streaks of neon and rain. I kept my eyes closed, trying to calculate my PTO days. If I got arrested, could I use sick leave? The absurdity of the thought almost made me laugh, but it came out as a dry, choked sound. Miller glanced at me in the rearview mirror, but said nothing. The precinct was a sensory nightmare. Blinding fluorescent lights hummed with a headache-inducing frequency. The air smelled of stale sweat, cheap coffee, and desperation. They put me in a small room with a metal table, 2 bolted-down chairs, and a mirror that was obviously two-way. Classic. I sat there for 45 minutes. A psychological tactic, probably. They wanted me to stew. Instead, I put my head down on the cold metal table and actually caught a micronap. The door opening jolted me awake. Miller walked in, carrying a manila folder, followed by the younger cop, who I learned from his badge was named Jenkins. Jenkins slammed a plastic evidence bag down on the table. "Wakey wakey, sleeping beauty," Jenkins sneered. I blinked against the harsh light and looked at the bag. Inside was a thin, stainless steel rod with a tiny loop at one end and a sharp lance at the other. It was the cum-dun extractor, the pimple tool. It had been wiped down, but the edges of the tiny metal loop were stained with a rusty, brownish crust. "Blood. Recognize this?" Miller asked, pulling out the chair opposite me. "It looks like the tool I bought," I said, keeping my voice level. "I told you I lost it." "You didn't lose it." Jenkins leaned over the table, trying to invade my space. "We found it at the bottom of the building's central dumpster, wrapped in a plastic grocery bag. A bag from the bodega on the corner. The bodega, where we pulled security footage of you buying coffee 3 days ago." "I buy coffee there every day," I said. "Half the building shops there." "The lab fast-tracked the swab," Miller said quietly. "The blood belongs to Marcus Thorne, the husband in 5B. The tool was driven directly through his tear duct into his brain cavity. Severed the optic nerve, pierced the frontal lobe. Instant death." My stomach heaved. The bagel from earlier threatened to make a reappearance. I clamped a hand over my mouth, swallowing hard against the bile. "Look at her. She's faking it," Jenkins scoffed. "You snapped, Emily. You haven't slept in 6 months. The guy was a menace. You went over there, he answered the door, and you jammed that thing into his eye. His wife came screaming out of the bedroom, and you grabbed a kitchen knife and took her out too." I dropped my hand, taking a deep, ragged breath. The sheer stupidity of his theory snapped my brain into focus. The corporate problem solver in me took the wheel. "Officer Jenkins," I said, my voice deadpan. "I am 5'2". I weigh 110 pounds in boots. Marcus Thorne was what? 6'3"? 250 pounds. "Surprise is a hell of an advantage," Jenkins retorted. "Physics is a bigger one," I shot back. "If I stab a giant in the eye with a needle, he doesn't just instantly drop. His autonomic nervous system reacts. He thrashes. He falls on me. Blood sprays everywhere. Look at my fingernails. I held my hands out. No bruises. Look at my face. Not a scratch. You think I fought a man twice my size, then overpowered his wife, and walked away without a single defensive wound." Jenkins opened his mouth, but I cut him off. "Furthermore," I continued, turning to Miller, "let's talk logistics. If I committed a double homicide and wanted to dispose of the murder weapon, do you think I would throw it in my own building's dumpster? I work in e-commerce supply chain. I know how tracking works. I would have put that tool in a padded envelope, generated a false return label to a defunct warehouse in Idaho, and dropped it in a USPS bin 3 zip codes away. It would be lost in the postal system until the end of time." Miller stared at me. A slow, genuine smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Jenkins just looked confused. "And the timeline," I pressed on. "Think about the timeline, detective. If I killed them at midnight, why the hell would I volunteer the information that I heard them fighting at 3 a.m.? If I was trying to cover my tracks, I would have agreed with the rest of the building. I gave you the 3 a.m. detail because it's the truth. I heard them." The room went dead silent. Only the buzzing of the lights remained. Miller tapped his fingers on the folder. "If you didn't do it, Emily, someone went to great lengths to make it look like you did. Your tool. Your trash. Someone knew you hated them." "Everyone knew I hated them," I said bitterly. "I called you guys twice a week." "We checked the lock on your door," Miller said softly. "No signs of forced entry. How did the killer get your tool?" I frowned, thinking back. "My landlord, Mr. Abernathy. He has master keys. He came in a few weeks ago to fix a leaking radiator while I was at the office. I left the bathroom door open." Miller stood up. "Jenkins, bag the tool back up. Go wake up a judge and get a warrant for Abernathy's apartment and his office in the basement." "Wait, you're buying her story?" Jenkins protested. "She's right about the postal system," Miller said flatly. And she's right about the 3 a.m. anomaly. Go. After Jenkins left, Miller looked at me. You're free to go, Emily.
For now.
Don't leave town. I'm not leaving my apartment, I muttered. I have too much work to do. It was 4 a.m. by the time I took a cab back to my building. The lobby was empty, the shadows stretching long and sinister across the cheap linoleum. I took the stairs to the 5th floor, too paranoid to step into the confined box of the elevator. As I reached my door, I paused. 5B was silent. Police tape still crisscrossed the frame like a morbid gift ribbon. I unlocked my door, stepped inside, and engaged the deadbolt, the chain, and shoved a chair under the knob. My laptop was pinging on the desk. Slack messages. Boss, 1:14 a.m. Emily, where's the Q3 report? Boss, 2:30 a.m. ignoring me is a career-limiting move. Boss, 3:45 a.m. If this isn't in my inbox by 9 a.m., we're having a very serious conversation. I stared at the screen, a hysterical giggle bubbling up in my throat. 2 people slaughtered next door. I'm dragged in for murder, and Chad from logistics is threatening my job over a spreadsheet. Capitalism truly never sleeps. I sat down, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. But I couldn't type. The silence of the apartment was pressing in on me, heavy and suffocating. If they died at midnight, why did I hear them at 3? I closed my eyes, forcing myself to remember the exact sound of the fight. I had been lying in bed, staring at the ceiling. The husband's voice. It was you, wasn't it, you bitch? Open up. My eyes snapped open.
Wait.
He didn't just scream that from his apartment. He always screamed that in the hallway while hitting my door with a baseball bat. But last night, at 3 a.m., my door never rattled. There was no bat hitting wood. The sound had come through the shared wall. Muffled. Distant. And the exact phrasing. It was you, wasn't it, you bitch? It was the exact same argument I had heard 3 days ago. Word for word. The same cadence. The same crash of glass afterward. I scrambled out of my chair and pressed my ear against the shared wall. Cold drywall. Someone had played a recording.
Why?
To mess with the timeline. To make sure there was a witness, me, who would swear the couple was alive at 3 a.m. It gave the real killer a 3-hour window to establish an alibi, clean up, and slip away. But why play it in 5B? The killer would have to still be in the apartment at 3 a.m. to hit play, which defeats the purpose of an alibi. Unless they didn't play it in 5B. I walked slowly away from the wall, looking down at the floorboards. Sound travels in cheap buildings.
Up, down.
Through the vents. The apartment directly below 5B is 4B. Mrs. Higgins' apartment. A chill violently spiked down my spine, settling in the base of my neck. The husband had his eyes stabbed out. The wife had a knife in her chest. Mrs. Higgins had told me those exact injuries at 7 a.m. in the lobby, before the bodies were even out of the building, before the police had briefed the press. How did an old woman with bad eyesight see the specific puncture wounds of a tear ducked through a face covered in blood while a body bag was being wheeled by?
She didn't see it.
She knew it, because she did it. But why frame me? Suddenly, a soft knock echoed through my apartment.
Tap, tap.
I froze. The chair under my doorknob creaked slightly as weight shifted in the hallway outside. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. I waited for the footsteps to walk away like last night. They didn't. Instead, a piece of paper slid slowly under the crack of my door. White, crisp paper. Then, the soft shuffle of slippers moving down the hall toward the stairwell. I waited 3 agonizing minutes before creeping to the door. I pulled the paper out from under the door sweep. It was an Amazon order receipt. Printed out. It was my receipt. For the professional grade cum-done extractor. At the bottom, written in perfectly neat, cursive handwriting, was a message. Tea helps the nerves, dear.
Come down to 4B.
Let's chat before the police come back. My pulse pounded in my ears. She knew I knew.
She was holding the threat over me.
If I called Miller now, what proof did I have? She had planted the murder weapon in a bodega bag with my receipts. She had the timeline manipulated. And if I ignored her, she might just feed more evidence to the cops. I had to get a confession. Or proof of the audio recording. I looked at my phone. 5:15 a.m. I opened the voice memos app, hit record, and slipped the phone into the breast pocket of my coat. I grabbed a heavy, solid brass paperweight off my desk, a corporate award for Employee of the Month, and slipped it into my right pocket. I pulled away the chair, undid the locks, and walked out into the hall. The stairwell was terrifyingly quiet. Every step I took echoed like a gunshot. I descended to the 4th floor. The hallway smelled faintly of lavender and old dust.
Door fear bay.
It was already ajar. I pushed it open. Mrs. Higgins? In the kitchen, Emily, a sweet, warbling voice called out. I walked in. The apartment was immaculate. Doilies on the armchairs, porcelain figurines on the mantel, a ticking grandfather clock in the corner. It looked like a grandmother's sanctuary. But as I walked toward the kitchen, I noticed the ceiling. Right in the center of the living room, directly under where 5B's bedroom would be, a small square of the drywall had been neatly cut away, exposing the ventilation duct. Sitting on a step stool directly beneath it was a heavy-duty Bluetooth speaker. Mrs. Higgins stood at her kitchen counter, pouring steaming water from a floral kettle into 2 china cups. She was wearing a quilted pink robe. She looked frail, harmless. "Chamomile," she said, not looking up. "It's good for insomnia."
Sit, dear.
I didn't sit. I stood by the archway, keeping my hand near my pocket. "You killed them." She stopped pouring. She set the kettle down with a soft clink. Then, she turned to look at me. The kindly, befuddled expression she always wore in the lobby was gone. Her eyes were sharp, dark, and utterly lucid. They looked like Miller's eyes when he was sizing me up, but emptier. "They were very rude," she said simply. "Rude?" I choked out. "You stabbed a man in the brain because he was rude?" "He was a brute," she corrected, picking up a silver spoon and stirring one of the teacups. "I lived in this building for 40 years, Emily. 40 years of peace. Then they moved in. The screaming, the stomping. My husband, God rest his soul, was a surgeon. I was his head scrub nurse for 30 years. I know quiet. I demand quiet. The human body is a noisy, messy thing, but it can be silenced very efficiently." She picked up the teacups and walked to the small dining table, setting one down opposite her. "Drink your tea." "I'm not drinking anything you give me," I said, my voice shaking despite my best efforts. "You used my Amazon package." "Ah, yes." She smiled gently. The delivery boy left it in the lobby. I saw the label. A come-down extractor. A fascinating little instrument. In the ore, we use something similar to relieve pressure behind the orbital bone. When I saw it, I knew the universe was providing a solution. You hated them as much as I did. You made such a fuss, calling the police, leaving notes. You were the perfect shield. "How did you do it?" I asked, needing her to say it clearly for the recording in my pocket. "He was huge." "Size means nothing if you can't see," Mrs. Higgins chuckled, taking a delicate sip of her tea. "I went upstairs at midnight. I knocked. He opened the door, ready to scream. I sprayed concentrated ammonia directly into his eyes from a perfume bottle. He opened his mouth to shout, and I stepped inside, kicked the door shut, and used your little tool. Right through the medial canthus. Up and in. He dropped like a stone. I felt the blood drain from my face. And the wife. She came running. Kitchen knife on the counter. It was quick." She sighed, looking almost bored. "Moving the bodies to avoid blood pooling was the hardest part. My joints aren't what they used to be, but the cleanup bleach is a wonderful thing." "And the recording?" I gestured toward the living room. "I recorded their fight last Tuesday," she said. "I played it through the vent at 3 a.m. I knew you would hear it. I knew your insomnia wouldn't let you sleep. You were my timestamp, Emily. You told the police exactly what I needed you to tell them." "You're insane," I whispered. "I'm well rested," she corrected. "Which is more than you can say. You look terrible, dear." "The police are going to find out," I said, gripping the brass paperweight in my pocket. "Miller doesn't believe I did it." "Detective Miller is a smart man, but he is bound by evidence," she said, her tone hardening. "And right now, the evidence says you are a sleep-deprived, hysterical woman who snapped." I made sure to wipe down the tool, but I left enough blood in the microcrevices to match Thorne's DNA. "I put it in your bodega bag. I threw it in the trash." "Why did you slide the receipt under my door?" I asked. "Why bring me down here?" Mrs. Higgins looked at me, a cold, reptilian smile stretching across her wrinkled face. "Because Detective Miller was asking questions about the building's keys. About the landlord." I realized my framed job was unraveling. I needed a neat conclusion. She reached into the pocket of her pink robe. My breath caught. She pulled out a small, amber prescription bottle. "Your sleeping pills, Emily. The ones you keep in your medicine cabinet. I borrowed them while you were at work yesterday. Such a heavy dosage." She tapped the side of the teacup I had refused to drink. "I crushed 10 of them into this chamomile. It would have been painless. You would go back upstairs, lay in bed, and simply fade away. The police would find the receipt, the guilt, the overdose. A tragic suicide brought on by the remorse of a double murder." Panic exploded in my chest. She wasn't just confessing, she was tying up loose ends. "I'm not drinking that." I backed away toward the door. Mrs. Higgins sighed, dropping the pill bottle on the table. From her other pocket, she withdrew something metallic. It wasn't a knife. It was a surgical scalpel. The blade caught the light, gleaming with a terrifying sharpness. "I didn't want to use this," she said, standing up. "It's messy. It will look like a struggle. But an arterial bleed in the carotid can be staged as a frantic, guilty suicide if I angle it right." She moved with a speed that defied her age. She lunged across the small kitchen. Adrenaline, pure and primitive, flooded my exhausted system. I didn't run. I pulled the heavy brass paperweight from my pocket and swung it with everything I had. Crack. The solid brass collided with her wrist. I heard the sickening snap of bone. Mrs. Higgins let out a sharp, breathless shriek, dropping the scalpel. It clattered onto the linoleum. She stumbled back, clutching her arm, her eyes wide with shock. She hadn't expected the corporate slave to fight back. She hadn't expected me to be armed. "You little bitch," she hissed, the sweet old lady facade shattering completely. She lunged for the scalpel on the floor with her good hand. I kicked it under the refrigerator. Then I ran. I bolted out of her apartment, taking the stairs 2 at a time. My lungs burned. My legs felt like lead. I slammed into my own apartment door, fumbled with the locks, and threw myself inside, locking it tight behind me. I collapsed against the wood, gasping for air, clutching my phone. I pulled it out. The voice memos app was still running. 14 minutes and 32 seconds. I hit stop. I saved the file as Higgins' confession. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely unlock my screen to dial 911. 911. What is your emergency? My name is Emily Vance. I live at 424 West 8th Street, apartment 5A. Send Detective Miller. I have the killer. I have the audio. The next 2 hours were a blur of flashing red and blue lights. I sat on the edge of my bed, a thick blanket wrapped around my shoulders, watching through the crack of my open door as uniform after uniform swarmed the hallway. They brought Mrs. Higgins out in handcuffs. She wasn't fighting. She held her broken wrist against her chest, her face an unreadable mask of stone. She didn't look at me as they walked her past. Detective Miller walked into my apartment a few minutes later. He looked exhausted, but there was a sharp clarity in his eyes. He held up a plastic evidence bag containing the Bluetooth speaker they'd pulled from her living room ceiling. "We found the audio files on her tablet," Miller said, leaning against my doorframe. "And we matched the scalpel under her fridge. Plus, your recording was crystal clear. The DA is already drooling." I pulled the blanket tighter around myself. "She was going to kill me." Miller nodded slowly. "She underestimated you. Most people underestimate the quiet ones." He looked around my apartment, his eyes lingering on my open laptop, where Slack notifications were still silently piling up. "You did good, Emily," he said softly. "You kept your head. You saved your own life." "Do I still have to stay in town?" I asked, my voice hoarse. Miller chuckled, a tired, genuine sound.
No.
"You're cleared. Go wherever you want. Get some sleep." He turned to leave but stopped.
Hey.
"When this is all wrapped up, let me buy you a real breakfast. Not hallway bagels. Actual eggs and bacon." I looked at him. The graying hair, the sharp eyes that missed nothing. He was the only person who had actually listened to me in months. "I'd like that," I said. He smiled, tipped an imaginary hat, and walked out, closing the door firmly behind him. The click of the latch echoed in the apartment. Then, silence. For the first time in 6 months, it wasn't a heavy, ominous silence. It wasn't the silence of waiting for the next scream, the next crash, the next terrifying pound on my wall. It was just quiet. Pure, undisturbed quiet. I walked over to my desk. The laptop screen cast a pale blue glow over the keyboard. "Boss, 7 a.m. Emily. I'm escalating this to HR. You are AWOL." I stared at the message. I thought about the spreadsheets. I thought about the supply chains, the missing packages, the endless, soul-crushing grind for people who didn't care if I lived or died. I thought about the brass paperweight sitting on my desk, the one I had used to shatter a murderer's wrist. Employee of the month. I reached out, typed 3 words into the Slack channel, and hit enter. "I quit, Chad." I slammed the laptop shut. I walked to my bed, kicked off my shoes, and fell back onto the mattress. I didn't take a sleeping pill. I didn't turn on a podcast or a white noise machine. I just closed my eyes. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I slept.